Evil people you've never heard of. They say that if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. A quote that perfectly describes Vasily Blokhin, the deadliest executioner in known human history. Blokhin got his first taste for blood after joining the Red Army during the events of World War I. Over the years, he became the perfect soldier. One who is able to perform tasks effectively, efficiently, and without hesitation. This of course really accelerated Blokhin's military career, as in 1921 he was recruited into the Soviet secret police organization known as the NKVD. One bonus on his extensive resume was his innate ability to remain emotionally numb when carrying out acts of violence. He simply saw it as part of the job, comparative to menial tasks like filing paperwork or having to put up with Deborah from HR's incessant complaints that your funny shirt just isn't work appropriate. Blokhin's unique skill, if you would call it that, quickly distinguished him amongst his peers. If you needed someone dead, Vasily was your guy. His work and unwavering loyalty continued to push him upward and onward. In just 6 years, he was assigned as head of a newly created branch of the NKVD by Mr. Supreme Soviet leader guy Joseph Stalin, a branch specifically designed for executions. And with that, Blokhin had become one of Stalin's most trusted workers, executing low and high-profile targets without question.
Excellent work, Blokhin. That goes right up on fridge.
During his service, Blokhin had personally executed thousands of people, including high-ranking Soviet officials during the Great Purge, an internal mass execution of anyone remotely accused of opposing Stalin's rule. Blokhin himself had been spared from the purge due to his repeated proofs of loyalty to the Soviet cause, his magnum opus being his involvement in the Katyn massacre. Now, if you've never heard of the Katyn massacre, I wouldn't be surprised. When teaching about World War II, history classes tend to focus on German war atrocities and kind of skim over all of the other ones, especially the Soviet Union's. Despite the German invasion of Poland in 1939 and World War II officially starting, the Allied powers of Great Britain and France didn't really do much in retaliation.
Oi, Germany, you better leave Poland alone.
Oh, fair point, carry on. The big bad Soviet Union had also invaded Poland just a few weeks later, capturing hundreds of thousands of Polish prisoners of war, many of which were sent to labor camps. But in the spring of 1940, around 22,000 prisoners consisting of Polish officers, engineers, teachers, and other civilians were systematically executed under Blokhin's supervision, with Blokhin himself having personally executed over 7,000 people in just 28 days. Now think about that for a second. 7,000 people in 28 days. That's 250 people a day. Now, Blokhin and his men reportedly would work 10-hour days non-stop, so that's 25 people an hour, or one person every 2 to 3 minutes. Now, these weren't indirectly through ordering his men, but this was by his own hand. Blokhin had pretty much developed an assembly line of death so efficient it would make Henry Ford envious. Prisoners would be escorted into a soundproofed room against a sandbag-lined wall. Without a word, these prisoners' last sensation would be feeling the muzzle of a German pistol in the back of their neck before being brutally murdered. Wait, a German pistol? I hear you ask. Why would Soviets be using German pistols? 2 words: plausible deniability. Think of it this way: if thousands of victims in mass graves happen to be found with German bullets lodged in their noggins, who do you think's gonna be blamed? Don't look at us, it was them. Blokhin's massacre is regarded as the largest mass murder conducted by a single person in known human history, even acknowledged by the coveted Guinness Book of World Records in 2010. Really stretching for content there. It is believed that throughout his career, Blokhin's personal kill count had reached tens of thousands, but his spree would soon come to an end. After Stalin privately passed away in a puddle of piss in 1953, Blokhin was forced into retirement in disgrace. He was ostracized by the public and stripped of his military honors during the de-Stalinization of the Soviet Union. So, of course, he did what any Russian does when they're sad or happy or breathing. He consumed a lot of alcohol, a habit that eventually led to his death in 1955 at the age of 60. Well, dang, that's pretty evil. Sure hope nothing bad like that happens to me.
Hey, it's ad time.
Welcome to Crossout, the ultimate post-apocalyptic vehicle shooter experience you've dreamt about since you were a zesty little zygote. What do? Why, you build your own vehicular vessel of violence from the wheels up in fractions of an hour, using thousands of different parts and weapons. Then use that monstrosity to utterly decimate other makeshift creations in epic PvP and PvE warfare. With ranks to ascend and zones to defend, building a death machine's what I recommend. Rockets that fly, chainsaws that rip, you can even slap on some sweet art for the drip. There's plenty of parts for you to equip when crafting your customized whip, so build it tough. Hey look, a lime. Okay, that's enough. That's the end of this rhyme. It's dangerous to go alone, so join one of 10 different factions. From the legendary loot-hunting scavengers to the chaotic and destructive lunatics, you'll easily find a group of disgruntled and shifty mercenaries to call a family. What's that? You've already spent all of your money on rent and eggs? No problem at all, because Crossout's available on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox for the low price of free. So go ahead and use that cursor or fangirl ears to hit that link in the description or pinned comment below to play today. Heck, out of pure desperation, I'll even throw in 3 days of premium access and 3 unique vehicles to all you PC players out there. Now that's an offer that's not gonna last forever, so get to downloading, you silly Billy. I gotta get back to it. My team needs me. Oh gosh dang it! Right after the thrilling events of World War I in 1918, the Austro-Hungarian Empire had collapsed. With a little bit of elbow grease and the mashing together of various kingdoms and regions, a new political entity was formed. The state of Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs, home to many Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs. One of those kingdoms thrown in the mix was Croatia, the birthplace of this stern jug of juice, Ante Pavelić. His main personality trait was loving Croatia. God, he loved Croatia. So much so that he made a name for himself and rose through the ranks as a politician and representative in state parliament in order to demand Croatian independence. But this guy, Alexander I, had other ideas. Who's he? Well, he's the Prince Regent in these parts and the one who just got done unifying all of these kingdoms and states. Years and years of political turmoil ensued, which is honestly to be expected when you force a bunch of different political regions together into singularity. In 1929, now King Alexander had hit a boiling point. In order to regain order, he dismantled and banned all political parties, declaring a royal dictatorship. He even came up with a new name for his kingdom, Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia. But since Yugoslavia is not Croatia, Pavelić had it. He fled the kingdom and conspired with revolutionary groups to undermine the rule of Yugoslavia, who responded, "Do you want a death sentence? 'Cause that's how you get a death sentence." And so Pavelić got a death sentence. He was exiled to Germany, but since he didn't feel like dying quite yet, he instead skedaddled off to seek asylum in Italy. There, he used his political influence and persuasive stern look to form the Ustasha, a Croatian nationalist movement aimed at achieving Croatian independence by any means necessary. And you can bet your fat tits that means bombings, assassinations, and uprisings. During said uprisings, King Alexander regrettably stated,
If you want a regime change, you need to kill me.
They did. On October 9th, 1934, King Alexander I was assassinated by Ustasha member Vlado Chernozemski, using a handgun hidden in a bouquet of flowers. Still living in Italy, Pavelić, along with several accomplices, were determined to be culpable for the assassination and were sentenced to death by Yugoslavia's friend France, who pressured Italy to carry out the deed. And Italy was all, "Linguini fettuccini, we ask a Mussolini." Thanks to his political privileges, Pavelić was only put under house arrest for 18 months. That'll teach him. Right, France? Oh, here we go. Looks like Germany's back at it again, and the world collectively Versailles in disappointment. After the invasion of France in 1940, Nazi Germany invaded Yugoslavia in 1941. This ultimately resulted in Pavelić being installed as dictator to a newly independent Croatia. The mean mustache himself even met with Pavelić and gave some pointers in the art of ethnic cleansing. The only art he ever saw any success in. But Pavelić would soon put this advice into action. During World War II, Pavelić had created his own network of concentration camps run by his beloved Ustasha, one of which being the Sisak concentration camp, the only known camp specifically designed for children. These camps carried out the collection and mass murder of nearly 400,000 Serbs, Jews, and Romani, with an additional 300,000 either exiled or forcibly converted to Eastern Orthodox Christianity, all for the sake of Croatian ethnic homogeneity. Towns were completely ransacked, villages were outright destroyed, and hundreds of thousands of innocent lives were lost. These actions gave the Ustasha notoriety that struck fear into the hearts of anyone who dared cross their path. Nazi Army General Edmund Gleiser-Hochtenau witnessed firsthand the atrocity of Pavelić and the Ustasha, saying, quote, "Our troops have to be mute witnesses of such events. It does not reflect well on their otherwise high reputation. The Ustasha have gone raging mad." That's pretty telling when even a Nazi general thinks you're being a bad dude. After the Axis powers fell, Pavelić got the hell out of Dodge, eventually fleeing to Argentina in 1948, but then some other surviving Ustasha members arrived. After a quick reunion of high fives and smooches, the gang wasted no time in forming the Croatian Liberation Movement. Persistent little buggers, weren't they? They were basically trying to control this from over here. It didn't work. After an assassination attempt in 1957, Pavelić hightailed it out of Argentina, eventually ending up in Spain, where he died of his injuries 2 years later. This is Idi Amin, regarded as one of the cruelest dictators in Ugandan history. He had humble beginnings back in 1946, where he served in the colonial army as a cook's assistant. In addition to cooking up a good steak, Amin was raring to have a job well done in his military career, so he speed ran through promotions within the Ugandan army, making it all the way up to captain in 1962.
I'm the captain now.
All of this impressive progress received recognition from Ugandan Prime Minister Milton Obote, and a friendship formed. Hey. Hi. One that would be fruitful in many shady activities, including ivory and gold smuggling. After being threatened with investigation by the Ugandan parliament, Obote overthrew King President Person Mutesa II and seized the position for himself in 1966. The ex-king was exiled to the UK, where he lamented over the loss of his country, ultimately drinking himself to death just 3 years later.
Poor little guy.
After the coup, Obote promoted a now more rotund Amin to commander of the Ugandan army. But all good times must come to an end. Obote himself was a terrible ruler. His regime was plagued with corruption and terror, resulting in nationwide starvation and cruelties toward the Ugandan people. Not surprisingly, Obote had experienced a failed assassination attempt where he was shot through the teeth and out his cheek. The assassin missed, and Obote is pissed, so in response he had any and all political parties banned, with their members jailed for life. Meanwhile, Amin was in the corner doing his own thing, building up his beloved military for less than necessary fighting in neighboring wars. Obote didn't like that, and Amin didn't like that Obote didn't like that, so they began not liking each other. As a personal bitch slap, Obote had stripped Amin of his freshly granted commanding privileges and threatened him with jail time for misappropriating military funds. But this only activated Amin's trap card, prompting a takeover of the Ugandan government while Obote was out and about doing president things. The Ugandan people, having just gone through years of suffering under Obote's regime, were pretty thrilled and cheered Amin's efforts. Woo. Now in control in 1971, Amin declared that the military would temporarily run the government until new elections could be run. He even promised to free all political prisoners. But he never did. In reality, he flew too close to the sun, taking comfort in its warmth. Just a week later, Amin declared himself President of Uganda, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, Ugandan Army Chief of Staff, and Chief of Air Staff. The ego's starting to take over a bit. With this uncontested power, Amin began systematic executions of anyone who, he believed, would oppose his rule. Roughly 15,000 civilians had disappeared, now believed to have been kidnapped and given front row tickets to Amin's newly constructed state-of-the-art torture facility. However, this failed to slake Amin's thirst for blood. He soon expanded his list of victims to various groups throughout the country. We're talking artists, journalists, lawyers, students, senior members of government, foreign nationals, anyone who had even the most infinitesimally small tie to Obote. There were even rumors of Amin being a cannibal, or at least having tasted human meat, though it seems like he rated it 1 star as it was, quote, too salty for him. Human rights organizations estimate that between 300,000 to 500,000 people were slain under Amin's tyrannical rule. Known as the Butcher of Africa, Idi Amin not only murdered his own people, but devastated the Ugandan economy as well. He had expelled around 80,000 business owners and seized their property. So Amin walked up to an African stand and he said to the man running the stand, "Hey, bump, bump, bump.
Get out of here or I'll kill you."
Then he waddled away, waddle, waddle. These businesses, which were basically the country's economic backbone, were handed off to his inner circle. And they all quickly went bankrupt from mismanagement. Edie? More like idiot. Anyway. The businesses accounted for about 90% of the government's tax revenue, so government funds went poof. Yeah, just like that. Amin became blinded with power, so much so that he was unable to see the inevitable brick wall that the country was heading towards. His closest cabinet members, realizing that murdering everyone and crippling an economy aren't really the best long-term policies, started to defect, abandoning Uganda to seek safety elsewhere. Amin even began losing control over his own military. Coups and mutinies were commonplace as officers fought for power. But he had a plan. I have a plan. We're gonna take Tanzania. Alley-oop. He's just not as funny as oversimplified. Uh-oh. Tanzania fought back hard. In order to save face, the former 10-time Ugandan light heavyweight champion Amin had a plan. I have a plan. Yeah, Amin actually suggested a boots to asses 1v1 super slam, but the Tanzanian president had a plan of his own. In the end, Amin was deposed and fled in exile, where he apparently ate up to 40 oranges a day until his death in 2003. Our last stop is definitely no picnic. Now, if this video wasn't satisfying enough, I do have more of these little evil bastards for another video, so if you want me to make it, let me know in the comments. While you're at it, let me know who you would want me to cover. For our last entry, we'll be taking a trip down to Colombia. Now, any of you Colombians out there might be familiar with this guy, but for those of us who don't put cheese in our hot chocolate, let me introduce you to Luis Garavito, perhaps one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. This guy was a straight-up monster. Appropriately nicknamed La Bestia, or The Beast, Garavito was arrested in 1999 and convicted of murdering 193 children. Garavito's crimes began when he was just 15 in 1972. He had reportedly suffered severe depression, psychosis, and paranoia, allegedly stemming from an extremely abusive and traumatic childhood at the hand of his father. Pairing all that mental anguish with crippling alcoholism and an aggressive personality, Garavito began compulsively forcing himself on young children. Disgusted by his own actions, he had attempted to seek help, attending church sermons, AA meetings, and even seeing psychiatrists, wanting nothing more than to live a normal, happy life. But he was never able to claw himself out of the dark hole that he was in. Look, there's no denying that childhood trauma is tragic, but when you commit unspeakable acts of violence against innocent children, or really anyone for that matter, sympathy kinda goes out the window. Being a victim's one thing, creating victims is another. Moving into the 80s, Garavito's habits had only escalated. He emphasized that his urges to act out were constant and, according to him, uncontrollable. He would impulsively assault homeless children, and to make matters worse, began carrying razor blades and lighters to satiate his growing lust for violence. After each outburst and eventually regaining his composure, Garavito claimed that he would be overwhelmed with guilt. He would write down the names of his victims in a notebook and pray for their safety. At this point, his victim count had crossed above 100. Devastated by his supposedly uncontrollable impulses, he desperately tried to find any answers as to why he was the way he was. He looked to religion, astrology, the occult, really anything that could potentially bring him some revelation. But during this little literary leap, he had stumbled upon a certain notorious autobiography. With each turn of the page, Garavito really started relating to this Adolf guy. I mean, they both suffered abusive childhoods, lived in poverty, are both complete dickholes, you know, that kind of stuff. Luis even went a bit further and began idolizing one Campo Delgado, a Colombian serial killer who had publicly murdered 28 people, including his own mother, in the 1980s. More specifically, he admired the national attention that Delgado received and wanted to experience that firsthand. Now, the 1990s is where Garavito really went off the rails. He was now apathetic in his crimes. He felt nothing. No remorse, no sorrow, nothing. With all emotional ties cut, Garavito's actions hit an apex. Across this decade, Luis committed the mass murder and assault of hundreds of children. In disguise, he lured victims into secluded areas in broad daylight where they were assaulted, stabbed, cut, burned, beaten, eviscerated, and dismembered. After their passing, the victims were often placed in dozens of mass graves scattered across the countryside, with some containing as many as 40 bodies. Now, you can't really hide violence of that caliber for long, so eventually the graves were discovered in 1998, and an official investigation was launched. Because of his continued alcoholism, Garavito's work was sloppy. He would often leave articles of clothing, empty liquor bottles, and various belongings at his crime scenes. Honestly, it's kind of weird that it took so long to get caught, but the mountains of evidence did eventually lead to his arrest in 1999. While being interrogated, Garavito confessed to the murder of hundreds of children. Now, of course, in order to prevent the large, sandpapery, unlubed fist of YouTube from giving my butthole an identical neighbor, I of course cannot go into the nitty-gritty of the crimes. You morbidly curious little deviants would have to look that up for yourselves. But I'll say I didn't warn you. In the end, Garavito's crimes rightfully warranted a sentence of up to 1,853 years, and 9 days, in prison. That's pretty great. Except for the fact that Colombian law at the time prevented any sentence from being longer than 40 years. And get this, since he had given a full confession and even helped investigators find the bodies, his sentence was further reduced down to just 22 years, and the Colombian population was pissed. But luckily, in 2021, Garavito's parole was personally denied by the Colombian president, who vowed that he would never be a free man again. And he never was. Luis Garavito was diagnosed with eye cancer and died in prison in 2023. That video was a real doozy, wasn't it? Looks like you need to clean your mind of all this negativity. So go ahead and click the link below to play Crossout. It's free, these bonuses are free, you'll be filled with glee, tee hee hee. Just play it. It's fun. Okay. If you do want to dive deeper down the rabbit hole of other horrors humanity has wrought throughout history, check out these videos. I'll see you over there.